You don't hate love. You just stopped chasing it. Somewhere along the way, you realized you're calmer alone than you ever were trying to be understood. Yet every time you say you're happy being single, people look at you with quiet concern, as if solitude were a symptom. You can feel it in their tone, in their questions disguised as kindness. You haven't met the right person yet? Don't you ever get lonely? And you smile, because the truth would sound strange to them. That sometimes being single feels more natural than being attached. That silence can be softer than company. But late at night, even peace feels complicated. You look around your home, everything in its place. No arguments, no expectations. And a thought slips in. Why does this still feel like something I have to defend? Because the world has taught you that being loved is proof of being worthy. That without someone else's eyes reflecting your existence, you start to disappear. Jung once wrote that loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. Maybe that's why modern love feels so heavy. Too many bodies, not enough meeting of souls. You've tried connecting before. The long conversations that turned into cages. The partnerships that looked alive but quietly drained you. And somewhere in the middle of all that pretending, you began to taste freedom. Raw, unfamiliar, terrifyingly honest. It wasn't joy at first. It was relief. Now, when you wake up to silence, it doesn't hurt. It centers you. You make your coffee, open the window, and realize this. Solitude isn't the absence of love. It's love finally coming home. And that's where the truth begins. Because what if staying single isn't loneliness, but evolution? If you stay, you'll see why Jung believed solitude is where the soul remembers its power. Most people don't actually seek love. They seek escape. They fall into relationships not because they've met someone real, but because they can't stand the echo of their own thoughts. That's why silence terrifies them. In a world addicted to noise, your solitude feels like rebellion. When you sit alone at a cafe, travel without a partner, come home to quiet, you're not just living differently. You're breaking an unspoken rule that happiness must be witnessed to be real. Society worships connection but quietly fears independence because independence cannot be controlled. It answers to no script, no validation, no performance. Carl Jung saw this clearly. He believed that most of what we call love is projection, the mind throwing its unlived parts onto another person, confusing recognition with chemistry. We fall in love not with people, but with the reflection of the self we lost. And when that reflection fades, we call it heartbreak. But the heartbreak was always an awakening, the collapse of illusion. Staying single doesn't mean rejecting love. It means refusing to participate in the illusion anymore. It's the courage to meet those missing parts directly, without distraction. There's something sacred about walking through life without a hand to hold. It's not loneliness. It's intimacy with existence itself. When you travel alone, eat alone, or sleep in the middle of the bed, you're not missing out. You're listening. You start to hear what relationships once drowned out, the texture of your own soul, the quiet pulse of clarity. You realize that peace was never supposed to be loud. People will misunderstand this peace. They'll tell you you're too guarded, too particular, too free. They'll say you've built walls. But solitude doesn't build walls. It builds a foundation. It's where you learn what your energy feels like without interference, where you learn to love not out of need, but out of overflow. If this means something to you, subscribe and stay. Your presence truly matters here. This path isn't easy. There will be days when freedom feels like exile, when you question whether your calm is just another kind of numbness. But sit with that doubt. It's not emptiness. It's recalibration. You're detoxing from a lifetime of being told you must be chosen to matter. What if the truth is simpler? What if the soul never needed permission to belong? Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Most people never get that privilege because they never walk alone long enough to meet themselves. Solitude strips away pretense until what's left is the raw you. The one who doesn't perform, doesn't seek approval, doesn't need to be understood. That's not loneliness, that's sovereignty. So the next time someone asks why you're still single, maybe the real answer is this: because I stopped mistaking attachment for love. Say, with that thought, it's not isolation you're living, it's liberation in disguise. Carl Jung believed that solitude is not a punishment. It's an initiation. He saw it as the crucible where the real self begins to take shape, stripped of performance, stripped of noise. When you're finally alone, the psyche stops pretending. The voices that once told you who you should be grow faint, and in their place, another voice begins to whisper, quieter, older, yours. But it's not gentle at first. It confronts you with all the parts you avoided while you were busy being loved. The fears you disguised as charm. The dependence you called devotion. The boredom you misread as loyalty. Alone, there is no one left to project onto. There's only the mirror of your own consciousness. Jung called this process individuation, the soul's journey toward wholeness. It begins the moment you stop defining yourself through others. Most people never reach this stage because they confuse merging with meaning. They think love is two halves becoming one, but Jung saw it differently. Love, at its highest, is two wholes meeting without losing their edges. That's why solitude is sacred. It's the time when you sharpen your edges, not to cut others away, but to see your outline clearly. Until you've lived alone long enough to know your own shape, you can't meet anyone without dissolving into them. There's a reason every spiritual tradition hides silence at the center of its practice. The desert, the monastery, the mountain, the empty room, they all serve the same purpose: to remove distraction long enough for the self to reveal itself. Jung said that the individual must experience the aloneness of being to be truly related to others. It's a paradox. The only way to love deeply is to first learn to stand entirely alone. Because the person who depends on another for meaning cannot love. They can only attach. When you first taste real solitude, it feels harsh. The mind panics. It scrambles for validation, for noise, for something to fill the open space. But if you don't run, something extraordinary happens. The silence becomes alive. It starts to pulse with awareness. You begin to feel connected, not to someone, but to everything. That's the moment you understand what Jung meant when he said that wholeness is better than goodness. You stop striving to be pleasing and start striving to be real. You might sit in your home one evening, no phone, no company, no sound, and suddenly realize how much energy you once spent trying to be loved. You'll see the exhaustion in it, the desperation disguised as romance. And then, for the first time, you'll feel something that no relationship ever gave you: the quiet dignity of simply existing. Being single isn't a pause between loves. It's the field where your soul finally grows into itself. Every minute you spend alone is not wasted time. It's creation time, the unseen building of a self so complete that love, when it finally comes, becomes choice, not necessity. And maybe that's why Jung said solitude is the foundation of the spirit. Because until you've learned to live with yourself, every other relationship is just a distraction from the one that matters most. Sit with that. You're not waiting for someone to arrive. You're becoming the person who no longer needs rescuing to feel whole. From birth, you were taught that safety comes from closeness. A mother's touch, a father's approval, a friend's acceptance. Each one stitched into your nervous system as proof that you are allowed to exist. The human psyche begins life by borrowing warmth from others. But somewhere along the way, dependence becomes identity. You stop asking, "Who am I?" and start asking, "Who will love me?" Jung believed that this is where the unconscious takes control, when survival patterns masquerade as romance. The adult who fears being alone is still the child searching for the hand that once meant safety. That's why most relationships don't begin with love. They begin with hunger. You meet someone, and before you know it, they become oxygen. Your mind translates familiarity into fate. You call it chemistry, but it's really recognition. Their wounds rhyme with yours. Together, you build a house of mirrors, each reflecting the parts the other can't face. You promise forever, but what you really mean is, "Please don't make me meet myself again." And when the illusion breaks, as it always does, you don't just lose them, you lose the version of yourself that existed in their gaze. Jung saw this pattern not as failure, but as initiation. He called it the projection of the anima and animus, the soul's hidden attempt to grow through relationship. We fall in love with our own unlived potential, projected onto someone else. That's why it feels so magnetic. The lover is both mirror and map. They show us what's missing and where we still refuse to go. But if we stay unconscious, that projection turns into possession. We start trying to control the reflection instead of integrating the image. The moment you realize this, something shifts. Love stops being an obsession and becomes education. Being single is the stage where that education takes root. Without a mirror, the psyche can finally see itself clearly. You begin to notice how much of your love was really fear. Fear of silence, fear of rejection, fear of seeing your own face without validation. But as the fear fades, clarity takes its place. You start to see the design behind the loneliness. Your solitude isn't punishment, it's rewiring. The nervous system that once panicked without company begins to breathe again. You wake up one morning and for the first time the quiet doesn't sting. It feels like space, wide, alive, full of possibility. The mechanism that once bound you to others was never about love. It was about control. Society rewards dependency because dependency is predictable. A person who doesn't need constant approval cannot be manipulated. That's why your solitude unnerves people. It exposes what they've avoided. They see you sitting comfortably alone, and it mirrors their own unrest. But your calm is not arrogance. It's integration. You've stopped outsourcing wholeness. You've stopped mistaking attachment for affection. Jung warned that the greatest danger of modern life is collective identification, the pressure to think, feel, and love like everyone else. Solitude breaks that spell. It forces you to hear your own thoughts without the echo of approval. At first, it feels like exile. Then, it feels like the truth. Because the moment you stop living as someone's reflection, you meet the one person you were born to understand, yourself. And here's the strange part. The silence you once feared is the doorway to everything you've been searching for. Stay until the end, and you'll see why Jung called solitude the soul's initiation. Imagine your inner life as an empty house. At first, it feels abandoned, too quiet, too spacious, too full of memory. You walk through its rooms and feel the ghosts of conversations that once filled the air, the warmth of hands that no longer touch the furniture. The walls seem to echo your steps, almost asking, "Why are you here alone?" For years, you avoided this place. You kept the lights off, the doors locked, afraid of what you might hear if you lingered. But one day, you return, not because you have to, but because the noise outside has finally exhausted you. You step inside. Dust floats in the sunlight like old thoughts suspended in time. The silence that once felt unbearable now hums with something new. Potential. You realize that the house was never haunted. It was waiting. Every creak in the floor, every shadow in the corner is just your past asking to be acknowledged. Jung called this meeting of the self the confrontation with the unconscious. It's when the psyche invites you to sit down with everything you've avoided. The loneliness, the anger, the longing, the memories that once kept you chasing love as a distraction. You start small. You clean one shelf, open one window. Air flows in, and with it comes something lighter, the sense that solitude isn't emptiness, but presence unshared. You begin to decorate this inner home, not for visitors, but for yourself. The books you love, the art that means something only to you, the music that feels like prayer. Slowly, the echo turns into resonance. The house starts to feel alive again, not because someone else entered, but because you did. People often fear this stage. They confuse the quiet of self-companionship with isolation. But solitude isn't a void. It's a vessel. Jung said that every human carries a symbolic house, a psychic architecture that reflects their inner world. Most people keep renting rooms in others' homes, moving from relationship to relationship, afraid to inhabit their own. You, however, are learning to live in your own walls. You're lighting candles in corners you used to hide from. You're realizing that being single doesn't mean waiting. It means inhabiting. The empty house becomes a temple once you stop expecting footsteps in the hallway. You cook for yourself, and it doesn't feel small. It feels sacred. You travel alone, and it doesn't feel incomplete. It feels alive. There's a rhythm to this life that partnership once interrupted. A deep, slow harmony between your breath and your being. The world might still call it loneliness, but that's only because they've forgotten what solitude sounds like. To them, silence is absence. To you, it's homecoming. You no longer need to fill the house to prove it's worth living in. You've discovered that light expands more freely when it doesn't have to impress anyone. And one night, as you sit by the window of this quiet home within you, you'll notice the strangest thing. The emptiness doesn't echo anymore. It listens. That's how you'll know. The house is no longer waiting for someone to arrive. It was waiting for you to return. Solitude is not a wall, it's a mirror. The longer you stay in it, the clearer it becomes. At first, you only see absence, the outline of what's missing, the shape of what used to be there. But with time, something shifts. You begin to recognize the reflection that was always waiting underneath the noise, your own face, unfiltered by expectation. Jung believed that the purpose of solitude was to reveal the undiscovered self, the version of you that can only exist when you stop performing for approval. Alone, you meet the parts that relationships often blur. The thinker, the dreamer, the shadow, the sacred child. You learn what your voice sounds like when it isn't trying to please anyone. At first, that voice trembles. It questions its right to exist. After all, you've been told that life's meaning comes from being chosen. Chosen as partner, as parent, as someone's other half. You start to realize how deeply that story has been written into your body. The way your stomach tightens when someone asks, "Are you seeing anyone?" The way you rush to fill silence with reasons. "I'm focusing on myself. I'm not ready. I just haven't met the right person." But maybe the truth is simpler. You're not missing anything. The need to justify peace is just the residue of an old spell. The one that taught you your worth must be witnessed to be real. In solitude, that spell begins to break. You stop measuring your life by who's sharing it. You begin to feel an unfamiliar sense of ownership. This breath, this moment, this choice. You realize how many times you bent yourself to fit someone else's rhythm, how often you mistook compromise for connection. And then, slowly, the mirror stops reflecting your wounds and starts revealing your wholeness. The light that fills you no longer asks for permission to stay. This is the power of conscious solitude. It turns reflection into recognition. The more you look inward, the more you see that being single isn't the absence of intimacy. It's intimacy redefined. It's the kind that doesn't depend on being touched to feel known. It's the quiet awareness that your presence, even alone, is still connected to the world, to the self, to the divine rhythm of existence. Jung wrote that the meeting with oneself is, at first, the meeting with the shadow. But beyond the shadow lies something radiant, individuality. When you embrace solitude, you don't just face your darkness. You discover your light in its truest form. Because no longer needing to be seen doesn't make you invisible. It makes you free. And that freedom, once felt, changes everything. You stop chasing reflection in others because you've become your own mirror. That's the quiet secret of solitude. It doesn't isolate you from love. It teaches you where it truly begins. For most of your life, you were told that love and freedom could not coexist, that to be devoted meant to give yourself away. That partnership required surrender. That compromise was the proof of care. And for years, you lived that story. You softened your voice so someone else could speak louder. You dimmed your light to make others comfortable. You mistook attachment for intimacy because the world told you that losing yourself was the price of belonging. But Jung warned that what the collective praises often hides is a deeper wound. He called it the sacrifice of individuality, the unconscious belief that we must dissolve who we are to be loved. When you finally step out of that cycle, something unexpected happens. The loneliness you feared becomes spacious. The silence you once filled with apology begins to sound like truth. You start to see love not as a merger, but as a meeting. Not two halves completing each other, but two complete beings choosing to walk parallel without erasing their edges. You realize that love without freedom isn't devotion. It's dependency dressed in poetry. And freedom without love isn't isolation. It's presence without performance. The real challenge isn't to choose between them, but to learn how to hold both. To let love expand you, not consume you. This is the part that scares people. Because when you stop playing the role of the partner, the caretaker, the good one, you begin to glow differently. You no longer orbit around approval, and those who once relied on your compliance will call you selfish. But you're not selfish. You're becoming sovereign. You've learned the hardest truth, that peace built on self-abandonment is just silence with good manners. You're not refusing connection. You're refusing to shrink for it. Jung believed that every soul carries both masculine and feminine energies, what he called the anima and animus. Most relationships are simply these energies seeking balance outside the self. But once that balance is found within, love transforms from need into art. You stop looking for someone to fill the emptiness and start looking for someone who can match the fullness. That's the difference between attachment and alignment. Attachment says, "Don't leave." Alignment says, "Walk with me as long as our growth allows." You begin to notice how different solitude feels when it's chosen, not endured. It's not an empty room anymore. It's a sanctuary. You can breathe in it. You can think without interruption. You can hear your intuition again. You no longer measure days by attention received, but by peace maintained. You learn that freedom isn't cold. It's clarity. It's waking up without the weight of performance. It's speaking only when words carry truth. It's smiling because you mean it, not because you must. And here's the irony, Jung would whisper. The moment you stop chasing love is the moment you become magnetic. Not because you're trying, but because wholeness attracts its own reflection. People sense it. They feel your calm as something rare. Some will be drawn to it, others unsettled by it. But you no longer dim your light for either. You understand now that your solitude isn't a pause before the next love story. It is the love story. It's the long-awaited reunion between your conscious self and your unconscious soul. So when someone asks why you're still single, smile softly. Because the truth doesn't fit into small talk. The truth is that you've stopped living for halves and started living as a whole. That's the secret most never learn. Freedom doesn't replace love. It refines it. And when you finally meet someone while standing in that freedom, it won't be to complete you. It will be to remind you how whole you already are. Solitude, like any art, must be practiced. It isn't about closing the door on the world. It's about opening a door inward. The quiet that once frightened you can become your most honest teacher if you let it. Jung said that the soul speaks in whispers, and silence is the only language it understands. So, begin small. When the house grows still, don't rush to fill it with sound. Sit with the stillness until you can tell whether it feels empty or simply full of things you've never heard before. Make a ritual of your aloneness. Wake up and greet the day as if you're meeting yourself anew. Brew your coffee slowly. Let the aroma become an act of devotion. When you walk, walk without distraction. No music, no phone, just the rhythm of your steps. These moments may look ordinary, but they are sacred dialogues between your consciousness and your soul. Every simple act done in awareness pulls you further out of survival and closer to presence. When old fears arise, the ones that whisper, "You're missing out or you'll die alone," don't argue with them. Acknowledge them like passing weather. Fear loses power the moment it's seen clearly. You can even thank it for reminding you how much you've grown, because you no longer run from the silence. You reside in it. Each day spent in solitude deepens your capacity for love. Not romantic love, but the rare kind that doesn't demand proof. You begin to realize that stillness doesn't isolate. It calibrates. It teaches you how to listen, how to hold space, how to be with yourself the way you always wished someone else would be. That's the quiet mastery of sacred solitude. It turns every ordinary moment into a conversation with wholeness. Freedom is beautiful, but it isn't painless. The moment you stop living by the world's script, you pay for it with misunderstanding. Friends drift. Family members worry. Strangers question. You'll hear the same sentence spoken 100 different ways. Don't you want someone? What they really mean is, does your peace make me uncomfortable? And it does, because solitude is a mirror. When you stand in it comfortably, it reflects everyone else's fear of their own emptiness. Jung wrote that loneliness is not the absence of people, but the inability to communicate what matters most. That's why solitude feels foreign to most. It reveals the silence beneath their distractions. The cost of freedom is this: you outgrow the crowd. You stop laughing at the noise that once entertained you. You stop chasing the closeness that once drained you, and yet, the space this creates is priceless. You begin to breathe again, deeply, slowly, without having to earn it. You no longer perform to be loved. You no longer shrink to be tolerated. You start living on a frequency that only truth can reach. The old you will try to return sometimes. It will crave validation, crave attention, crave the comfort of chaos disguised as connection. When that happens, pause. Remember how exhaustion used to taste. Remember the nights you fell asleep beside someone but still felt invisible. That memory isn't meant to haunt you. It's meant to remind you what you've transcended. People may say you've changed, and they'll be right. You've traded attachment for authenticity. You've traded the illusion of being needed for the reality of being whole. Jung believed that every person must choose between comfort and consciousness. Comfort keeps you asleep. Consciousness keeps you alive. You chose awakening, and awakening is rarely comfortable, but it's always worth it. The gift of staying single is not the absence of love. It's the transformation of love's direction. You begin to pour it inward until it overflows naturally outward. You start to see beauty everywhere, in the morning light, in quiet meals, in the softness of your own company. This isn't selfishness, it's restoration. The world might never fully understand that kind of peace. But you will. Because when the noise fades, and you can finally hear your own breath, you realize something profound. Being alone never meant you were unloved. It meant you were finally loved by the one person whose love you needed most, your own. And that love, once found, cannot be taken, betrayed, or broken. That is the true cost and the lasting gift of solitude. Losing what never belonged to reclaim what always did. Night falls differently when you're no longer waiting for anyone to arrive. There's a kind of peace that comes only when the door stays closed. Not out of bitterness, but out of belonging. You make dinner for one. You light a single candle. The air hums quietly, not with absence, but with presence. You realize the silence you used to fight against has become the rhythm of your life. It doesn't echo anymore, it breathes. This is the sound of wholeness, subtle, steady, self-sustained. You're not lonely, you're lucid. You see how every heartbreak, every season of emptiness, every moment you once called failure was actually preparation. The solitude that once scared you became the soil that rooted you. Jung once wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But you did it. And now, acceptance no longer terrifies you. It liberates you. You're no longer living as half of something. You're walking as the whole. When you wake in the morning, the light feels softer. The mirror greets you like an old friend. You've stopped searching for reflections that validate you because you finally recognize the one in front of you. This is not the end of love. It's the beginning of a new kind of intimacy, one that doesn't depend on another heartbeat to stay alive. So tonight, don't wish for someone to fill the space beside you. Sit in it. Let the quiet expand. Feel how alive it is. Because this stillness, this simplicity, this awareness is not a pause before life resumes. It is life. And maybe that's what staying single really means. Not emptiness, not waiting, but the beautiful, unshakable realization that you were never missing anything to begin with. Leave the light on. It's not for anyone else. It's for you, the home you finally come back to.